We're talking today with Robin Graham of Manhattan, Kansas, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Robin, begin with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Rochelle, New York in 1943.
Okay. And did you grow up there?
I spent all of my years there except for my senior year in high school, and the company my father worked for was transferred to New Jersey, so I spent my senior year in New Jersey.
Okay. And what was your father doing for a living?
He was a purchasing agent.
Okay. And what year did you finish high school?
I graduated in 1961.
Okay. And what did you do when you graduated?
I went to Marietta College for 4 years, and then Emory University after that for 2 years. And then after that, I went to work in the Texas oil field until the draft board decided to catch up with me in 1968.
Okay. So at that point, so you're like 25 years old, and they draft you?
Thereabouts.
Okay. Well, 1968, they were looking for a lot of people, and you were, of course, past any deferment by then. Okay. Now, prior to that, did you have any thought that they actually would draft you?
Well, I wasn't too enthused about the concept. My brother had been drafted and he hated every minute of it, but that was his personality.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find something bad, make it happen. My favorite uncle, was dead set against the Vietnam War because the Kennedys got us into it,
Mm-hmm.
which they did.
They had help, but yeah, they're part of it.
Just as with the history I wrote, you know, Bobby Kennedy there at Tonsanute in February of 1962, you know, we are going to be here and we're going to stay until we win.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not enthused about being in the military. I had no desire to kill anybody or to be killed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was no military background in the family, as all of the men had either been too old or too young when the wars came along. So I was the first one in the family who ever got a chance to go to war.
All right. And did you consider not going?
No.
Okay.
Because my attitude was I played the game as far as it would go.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And my number was up, so I'm going to see what happens.
Okay. So you then went to basic training?
Yes, I did.
And where were you for that?
I was at Fort Dix.
Okay, so Fort Dix, New Jersey. And what was the company you were in, did it have a lot of college grads, or were you in there with a bunch of kids?
Well, they were mostly a bunch of kids from the Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
There were a few from other parts of the country, but mostly Northeast and mostly high school graduates.
Okay, so you were kind of the old man, or
Well,
one of them?
I think there was one fellow there who was 34 who decided to join up to see if he could take it, and he did.
Okay, all right. And so what was the basic training experience like for you?
Interesting, because again, my attitude was, I'm going to make the best of it, and if I can't find something to laugh about, then something's wrong.
Okay,
So I just got through it.
all right. And how did the drill sergeants treat you?
Not too bad. The company commander was the worst.
Did you have a sense that he had been to Vietnam, or?
Oh, he had been there all right,
Mm-hmm.
but he was, dare I say, a homosexual.
Okay,
And one of the soldiers in the basic company was his favorite, and he would have them in his Cadillac during bivouacs.
okay. Yeah, that'd be an inspiring way to get started then. Okay, and were you able to handle the physical stuff and the training? Were you in good
Of course.
shape? Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say I was out of shape, but I wasn't in good shape. But I went with it,
Mm-hmm.
made the best of it, and I liked it.
Okay. And then are you given options now for what to do next, or?
Well-
You have basic training, and then normally you go on to advanced individual training after that.
Right.
And did you do that?
Okay, now what happened was, knowing that I was going to be drafted, I was aware of the officer candidate school option.
Mm-hmm.
And my attitude was, I don't want to go to Vietnam. So if I go to basic AIT officer candidate school, that will be 10 months that I'm still in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And then 4 months after commissioning, I'll be in the States, and then 1 month of leave. The war might be over by that time, and I won't have to worry about it. But it didn't happen that way.
But you had signed up basically for the
Officer candidate school.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Now, did they give you an AIT first, or you?
Oh yes, you had to go through AIT.
And where did you do that?
Fort Dix.
Okay. And was that basically an infantry AIT?
Oh yes.
Okay. And to what extent were they trying to prepare you for Vietnam?
Well, we'd go out on bivouacs, and it was an awful long time ago. And again, it was just a situation of finding the good things and making good things happen, and just trying to find enjoyment wherever you were.
Okay. But then sort of on a practical level, did they have things like mock-up Vietnamese villages or booby traps or?
I really can't recall at this time.
Okay, so that doesn't really stay with you, just something you got through.
Yeah,
Okay,
they had that in officer candidate school, but I don't recall it in AIT.
okay. And then where did you do the OCS?
That was at Fort Benning, Georgia.
In Georgia. Okay. And how long a process was that?
That would be 6 months,
Okay.
but I will, if I may. One of the lessons I learned in the Army was show up at the last minute. So at AIT, a bunch of us were to show up at Fort Benning for OCS. And we were to meet at the Holiday Inn in Columbus, Georgia. Well, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a bunch of the guys said, well, we ought to go over there, but our orders say 5 o'clock. Well, we better go over there. So they went over, and we finally showed up around 5 o'clock. The ones who showed up early made up the tail end of a company that started training the next day. Those of us who showed up late got to spend an extra week forming a new company. So,
Adds an extra week to
an extra week.
There you go. So what did you do during that first week while you're waiting?
We spit-shined a barracks that had been left by a transportation company sent to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So we spit-shined the whole building. And we would sit down on the floor and take a razor blade and scrape off all the old layers of wax and put new layers of wax down and buff them and clean the latrines and just make it sparkling.
And was that preferable to being in Vietnam?
Well, it was another situation of can't do anything about it, so you might as well enjoy it.
All right.
OCS was sort of like being in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you didn't have any control over your life, so you found ways to make things interesting.
Did you find any ways to game the system while you were in there?
Oh yeah.
What did you do?
Okay, I was in 4th Platoon. And 4th Platoon were the bad boys in the company. 2 of us had master's degree, a whole bunch had bachelor's, and a few just had high school diplomas. And the slang for forbidden food is pogey. So we would have cleanup before study hour in the evening. We would do up a list of what we wanted in the way of pogey. Guys would sneak out, get all this stuff together, and because our platoon was on the top floor, right next to the hatch leading to the roof of the building, during study hall, they'd put ropes down, the tent ropes down, to laundry bags full of pogey, drag it up to the roof, put it there, and then around 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd go up and get it and bring it down to the guys who had ordered it. And we'd have it. It would all be cleaned up before the TAC officer showed up. Of the 6 platoons, we never got caught because we had a system. And we had the roof.
Yep. All right. And what did they actually include in the training for you? What kinds of things did you have to do?
Well, there was a lot of physical training, a lot of book training, a lot of tests, weeding out people academically, and then they had the bayonet sheets where we got to evaluate the soldiers in our platoons as to their capabilities. And then some guys either fell out of the system academically or physically, or some guys said, I don't want any more of this stuff, and they got out, and as soon as they got out, they were sent over to Nam.
Right.
But the ones who failed were given the opportunity to be recycled in another company.
Okay. And so how well did you survive all of that?
I'm here.
That's true. You did. Okay. Now, did they send you around to different places? Did you go like to Dahlonega or down into a swamp or anything
No,
like that?
none of that. That's
so you
just
weren't,
ranger
you
school.
weren't doing ranger school stuff?
No. No, it was just simple OCS, and what happened was we went in October, had 2 weeks Christmas leave, came back, graduated at the end of April 1969.
Okay. And then do you get some kind of assignment in the U.S. before they send you
Right.
overseas? So where did you go then?
Had 2 weeks leave and then went to Fort Riley, where I was assigned to Company A, 1st and 19th Infantry of 24th Infantry Division.
Okay. And what was your job there?
I was an infantry mechanized platoon leader.
Okay. And so what did you do day to day?
Keep the troops in line. And we'd go out on exercises with the M113 mechanized carriers and go all over the prairie. And the thing was, my civilian training was geology, and I knew how to read topographic maps.
Mm-hmm.
So when A Company went out, I was always in the first track because I got them out there and I got them back.
All right. But this is something that's done with the expectation that at a certain point in time you're going to be sent off probably to Vietnam.
Right.
Do you know if there were any men you were with there who would go to Germany or someplace
Pardon?
instead? Did anybody go to Germany or someplace? Or
No,
not
not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
We were gearing up for a forager, and I was hoping we'd go to a forager, but I didn't get the chance.
Okay. What was Reforger?
That is where return to Europe, American forces, so that the 24th Division at that time would be sent over to Germany as a reinforcement in case there was an attack from the east, so they would go over there on exercises to make sure everybody knew what they were going to do.
Right. Okay. But that doesn't happen for you.
Nope, didn't happen for me.
Okay. So when do you go to Vietnam?
Okay, what happened was I got orders to Vietnam, but I had 2 weeks of jungle school beforehand, another 2 weeks when I wasn't in Nam.
Yeah.
So after the 2 weeks in jungle school,
Where was the jungle school?
in
Canal Zone?
Canal Zone of Puerto Rico, or rather, I'm sorry, Canal Zone of Panama.
Okay. And did that have any value?
Oh yeah, it was fun being out in the afternoon, rainstorms, and just being out in the jungle and realizing that you're in a triple canopy jungle. It's unfamiliar, certainly something I'd never experienced, even though I spent a lot of time in forests. And it was an interesting experience learning how to get through the jungle during the day as well as night.
Okay, so it had some practical value.
Most assuredly.
Different people say different things about that.
Most assuredly.
For you it did, okay. Plus it was 2 weeks that count as overseas, right?
Right.
Yeah, so much the better. Okay, so, and then from there, they bring you back to the States and then to
Right.
Vietnam?
So what happened was we were flown back to the States and then had a couple of days leave with the family with orders to show up at the Oakland airfield at 10 o'clock in the evening of whatever day it was. So I caught the flight from Newark to San Francisco, caught the bus over, and the bus got me there, I think, maybe a half hour before 10 o'clock. I show up, Sergeant says, "You're late." I said, "No, I'm not." Says, "No later than 10 o'clock." "You're late." "No, I'm not." "Well, your plane is already loaded and ready to go. You're going to have to wait for the next one." So I waited for the next one. And what was interesting was some of my OCS buddies were on the flight, and they went to Hawaii and then over, but across the Pacific they had turbulence and the plane dropped a couple of thousand feet, and it was not a pleasant experience. Whereas our flight went up by way of Alaska and Japan, got into Tonsanute and went through the placement center. But what was interesting is when we got in Tonsanute, when we first checked in, there was a guy coming back from medical leave from Japan, and he had been in the 101st. And we were talking with him. He said, "You're all going up to the 101st. We're not airborne qualified. Doesn't matter. They need you." So anyway, after going through the repo depot, I find I'm assigned to the 101st.
Okay. Now, when you first get to Vietnam, get off the plane, what's your first impression?
That it was muggy, hot. I mean, this was November of 1969. The news media back in the States made it look like everything was being blown up every minute of every day, and that was not the case.
And so were things fairly calm and orderly when you show up? Yeah.
Most assuredly.
Okay. And so you go, and was the replacement depot, was that at Long Binh or Benoit or somewhere else?
Yeah, I think it was at Benoit.
Okay.
And then from there, went to the Screaming Eagles replacement training area, SERTS, and that was located there at Benoit.
Okay, so they were doing it right down there and not up at Camp
Right.
Eagle or
It
whatever.
it was the last SERTS before it was moved up to Camp Eagle.
Okay. All right. And so what did that school consist of?
Well, it taught us basic patrolling techniques, and it was interesting hearing the bombs coming in, or so to speak, the rockets, artillery, and all that. And what was interesting is you learn the difference in sound. You could tell outgoing compared to incoming, and you'd sleep through the outgoing and wake up with the incoming.
All right. And was this a standard thing that everybody went through, or did they separate officers and enlisted?
No, we all went through the SERTS at the same time.
Okay.
And this, again, was the last SERTS at Benoit.
Right. Okay. And then how do they get you up north from there?
We were flown up in a C-130 to Hue. And then at Hue, we were put in a 18-wheeler going from Camp Eagle to Sally and then Camp Evans.
Okay.
And what was interesting was we didn't have any weapons. There was a GI at the tail end of the 18-wheeler looking out the back door with an M16. And all we saw was a roadway with mortar rounds in Highway 1. So anyway, my assignment was up to the 2nd of 506 Infantry and 3rd Brigade. So at 3rd Brigade headquarters, I was jeeped down to 2506 Infantry. I get down there, and Major Law, the XO, said, "We can't use you. We've got too many 2nd Lieutenant Infantry. I'm sending you back, and you're going to have to be reassigned to somebody else."
Okay.
So I went back up to 3rd Brigade headquarters and cooled my heels. And while I was cooling my heels, 3rd Brigade got a call. "Send him back." So I reported to Major Law again. "I saw in your record that you've got a master's degree, so you knew how to do research and paperwork and things like that." "Yes, sir." "What do you know about supply?" "Only what they taught me at Fort Benning." "Good, you're going to be our next property book officer," which is an warrant officer slot, a CW2. And Major Law knew he wasn't getting a replacement for months. So Mr. Boswick, the black CW2 who was leaving, had to teach me how to be a property book officer. But before I go into it, there's one thing I want to say. My last day with my platoon at Fort Riley, my sergeants and specialists who had been to Vietnam got me in one of the rooms. And they told me, if you treat your men over there the way you have treated us, they will make sure you come home alive.
So basically treat them with respect? Yeah.
And to have fun with them.
Ah, okay. Very good.
You know, treat them as real life human beings and to make life as fun as you can. So anyway, Mr. Boswell was not at all interested in teaching me the ropes, but he had to. So when he left, the sergeant, Staff Sergeant Snyder, who was the property book NCO, I said to him, Sergeant Snyder, I don't know what I'm doing. Please help me. He said, don't worry, sir. I'll take care of you. And again, showing respect for the people who know what they're doing. So I served as property book officer. And about a month after serving as property book officer, the brigade property book officer came down to tear our books apart. How can a second lieutenant infantry be a property book officer? He could not find a single problem with anything in the property books. It was as right could be, and he was mad. Anyway, a number of weeks later.
But before we go forward, can you just explain a little bit for an outside audience what a property book officer does?
Okay, a property book officer is a part of the supply system. Now each unit has a specific TOE, that is table of organization. Within that, they are allotted so many machine guns, rifles, desks, typewriters, uniforms, rucksacks, whatever. And all of those are controlled on a property book. So you've got a property book for, let's say, the machine guns. You've got all the machine guns listed by serial number and which companies have those machine guns and who are signed for them. So the property book basically is the representative responsible for ensuring that the battalion has everything it needs. If something's missing, goes down to Camp Eagle, picks it up from basic supply, and takes it and distributes it throughout the battalion.
Okay.
So about 3 or 4 weeks after the brigade property book officer found displeasure that he couldn't find anything wrong, I was outside the bunker or what have you, the office one day, and Colonel Law said to me, how would you like to go in the field? Meaning be a full-fledged infantry officer. And I apparently blanched and my mouth dropped and I stammered, I kind of like what I'm doing. And Major Law said, great, you're the best property book officer I've ever seen. But again, what it took was somebody who didn't want to go in the field. And let me go back to something earlier. In basic and AIT, there was a book called M. And it was a pocketbook about the 1st Division. And it was about this company that went through basic AIT, went to the 1st Division, then over to Nam. And a couple of the guys remarked how when there were waiters at the officers club, if they did it good enough, they got to stay there. So, in essence, I was following that train of thought.
You were highly motivated.
Highly motivated. But again, what I was doing was essential. And what I was doing was something I knew I could do because I was trained to do it, not only by Mr. Boswell, but also by Sergeant Snyder. So anyway, a true CW2 came in, Mr. Hosing, so they had to figure out what to do with me, and they needed a supply and transport platoon leader. which meant I switched over to being responsible for all the supplies going out to the units in the field, as well as to the fire bases when we were on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I spent the whole rest of my tour doing, was ensuring that the supplies got to the soldiers in the field. And during my time, Colonel Lucas would say, "Would you like to go to the field?" And I say, "No, I like what I'm doing." And he said, "It's okay, because you're doing a great job." And this is what's important. And this is one of the things I want to stress, and one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, is without the pilots who did everything they possibly could, to even to the point of losing their lives, to take care of the soldiers in the field, they would do it. And to those of us in supply, other than our own families, the people in the field were the most important people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to ensure that whatever they needed, they could get. And there was at one time when C Company was on Rocket Ridge, and they were socked in, and they had not been able to get any supplies for a period of time. And they were out of all the food. They had plenty of water from the condensation and all. And they were on Rocket Ridge. And they had to get the supplies. And again, I knew how to read maps. And one of the things, the pilots never refused to go where I directed them to, and we never missed an LZ or a drop zone. So what I did was, we loaded up the helicopter inside. We got on the west end of Rocket Ridge. I told them how high to go elevation-wise and a compass direction. Mm-hmm. And we were flying in fog. I looked down, and the treetops were just below the skids. Absolutely no point of reference on anything. I had no idea where we were. And eventually the pilot said, "We're going to lose it, we've got to turn around." I said, 10 seconds more. And right over then, we got onto the radio, "You're right above us." Mm-hmm. I looked over the side, and there they were looking up at me. So I threw everything over the side, and one of the most important items was the red mail bag, mm-hmm. the mail from home. And when there was a kick out, I always ensured there was a case of sea rations inside the mail bag, so that it went straight to the ground and wouldn't get caught up in the trees. Mm-hmm. And then after that, the pilot did a Huey. I sat on the floor of that helicopter and have no idea how we had got back, because I had no idea how we got there, but we did. But that's, without their dedication, mm-hmm. we couldn't have done it.
Now, was it standard for you as that platoon leader to go out on these flights and go out to on the drops?
I did it because I wanted to.
Okay.
And part of it, during the monsoon, I knew the topography. Mm-hmm. And a number of instances, the landing zones would be above the clouds or in the clouds. Mm-hmm. And I would direct the pilots to a terrain feature and then say, "Go up and go forward." Mm-hmm. And never once did we miss a landing zone, and never once did we miss a drop zone, even though it was in the clouds.
I expect that was appreciated. In general, the guys who served on the ground were very appreciative of what the pilots did, yeah. and anybody who was actually back there doing their jobs and making sure they got served.
They were our saviors.
Yeah. Now, how many men were in your platoon?
Okay, now this was the situation I never knew.
Okay.
Sergeant Wickward was the sergeant first class platoon sergeant, and he was in the rear. Now, when Ripcord was established, I was out there as the supply representative. Mm-hmm. But let me just go back a bit. Okay. When Ripcord was first landed on the 12th of March, I took out the resupply and then carried back one of the dead bodies. Mm-hmm. And then when they went out on the 1st of April and everything got shot up, the A Company and all went over to Hill 880 down that saddle and up that hill, and they were socked in at that landing zone. I don't recall how many days they were up there, but they were socked in, and one morning I got a call, there's a chance it's opening. And again, because I knew the terrain, I brought the helicopter in below that landing zone, and it was in the clouds. Brought it up, we made it right into the landing zone. We dropped off the sea rations, the water, the body bags, took off, and you could see Ripcord was above the clouds. And then we got back, and then I came back and went in and we picked up the bodies. But again, I was fortunate because I knew the land and knew how to read it.
Okay. And when you first joined the battalion, was Lucas the commander of it yet?
No, there was another battalion commander. Lucas came in early in March.
Okay. Did you have any contact with the previous fellow, or mostly just with Major Tanner?
No, most of my dealings, the previous battalion commander was somebody who was not a micromanager. He just let Major Law, the executive officer, handle things, and Major Law was absolutely a fantastic man, and he was seriously wounded on Ripcord on the 1st of April, and he was medevaced out and was finally given medical retirement in August of that year.
Okay. And so then Lucas comes in, and then who is his executive officer at that point?
We had a man by the name of Sherman Davis.
Did he make much of an impression on you or last very long?
Not particularly. Again, my sole concern was supply.
Okay.
I did not have much interaction with him at all.
That's because you weren't doing the property book anymore.
No, I was no
you were
longer
now
doing
with
the
supply
property
platoon.
book.
So,
Right.
So who were you reporting to?
I was reporting to the S4, the supply officer.
Okay. And who was that at that time? Or do you not remember?
Well, at that time, there was a Captain Sylvester who was bounced out of the position, and then one of the company platoon leaders, Jim Rachel from A Company, was made the S4. So I worked for him.
Okay. Now, what then, I guess eventually they do manage to establish the base on Ripcord.
Right, in April.
Yeah, later in April. And then basically, are you going back and forth there, or?
No, what had happened there was I had 4 platoon members out there. 2 of them had been in the 1st Division and were sent up to the 101st to finish out their time when the 1st Division rotated back to Fort Riley. And then 2 of the and they were infantry, and I had one guy who was supply and another guy who was supply, and that was just it. So there were 4 of us, and I made the 5th. And we built our bunker that could fit all of us in. So we operated off of Fort, excuse me, out of Ripcord. Now what would happen is the units in the field around Ripcord would send in their requests for supplies 2 days in advance. We would radio those requests back to the rear. They would be gotten and sent to Ripcord. We would add the ammunition and the water and the sea ration to those requests, and then we would fly them out the next day to the various units.
Okay, so Ripcord itself had sort of stockpiles of a lot of those basic supplies.
So I had an ammunition dump, I had a sea ration dump, I also had a engineered dump that contained all of the barrier materials such as engineer stakes, barbed wire, things of that nature, and I had a water supply point as well as a gasoline supply point, a diesel supply point, and when they finally put a helipad out there at the west end of Ripcord, I had a JP4 fuel point.
All right. And now, was it your choice to be out on Ripcord rather than back at Evans, or?
Well, it was like this. Colonel Lucas was out there. I was the supply representative. and being out there was fine with me.
Okay.
And the thing was, I worked with the platoon when we were building everything up. I was right there with them. When we were loading ammunition, whatever, I was right there with them. And, you know, there wasn't any difference when it came to getting the work done. We all did it together.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, so you're basically, so when do you actually kind of set up shop on Ripcord? How long after the landing, the initial, because they created the base about the 11th or so of April, and then...
Well, the thing is, we got on Ripcord and it was bright and sunny. And once we got there, we were in the clouds again. And if there had been enough North Vietnamese there, we could have been run over and nobody could have done a thing because we were in the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
No helicopters could have come in. Any artillery fire, mortar fire come in, there was no way of registering it or whatever, and they could have wiped us out. There was just one string of barbed wire around the place,
Mm-hmm.
and you couldn't see more than 10 feet.
But you were there basically pretty much very, very quickly after the Charlie Company takes it over.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All right. So you're basically building your own bunker and...
right. We built the bunker at night and built up all the supply requirements during the day.
Okay. And so over the next couple of months, you're kind of going into May, into June.
Right.
What is daily life like for you up there on Ripcord?
Okay, the daily life was a situation of getting up, getting breakfast, getting all the supplies ready, going to the Tactical Operations Center, getting the locations for each unit, and I had a sea ration carton lid that was about so big that I had a map on with an acetate, and I would plot all the locations on that map so that when we took the supplies out, I would be standing there or sit behind the pilots. I'd have a radio with the ground, and I would direct the pilots into the landing zone or the drop zone. And we just do that until the day's supply was done, and then I would go in and brief the colonel at night, and then it was time to go to bed and start all over the next day.
All right. And what impression did you develop of Colonel Lucas in that period?
The more and more was the fact that he was human, and that even though he micromanaged, he was doing the best he possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I did not like him initially because he was so into everybody's business, where as a previous battalion commander wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, I guess he and I got to a certain rapport where he knew that he didn't have to worry about supply.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he asked me 3 times over the months, do you want to go to the field? I said no. He said, fine, you're doing what's needed.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of recognize that part of things, certainly. And when you're flying out with the pilots and so forth, were you taking fire or...
Sometimes. What really amazed me one time was, it was a clear day and we were flying over the Rochelle Valley coming back from a resupply mission and heard artillery shell flying in the area. You could hear it whistling. And I wondered, I sure hope they know where these helicopters are, but none of them were hit. But there was one time when, I think it was Echo Company, was down in the Three Hills region, and they had been badly hit.
So that would be really the recon platoon.
Pardon?
Well, Echo Company was recon and mortars.
Right,
Yeah.
but
So,
it was the recon.
Right.
I think it was Echo, I'm not sure, but it had been hit down in the Triple Hills, and they needed not only a resupply of grenades, ammunition, all that stuff, but they also had wounded. So I went on it, and that was one of the things. If it was a hut landing zone, I never let any of my men go on it.
mm-hmm.
If anybody was going to get hit, it was going to be me. And again, this goes back to something I learned at Officer Candidate School. the most important thing I learned was not at Infantry Hall, but out on one of the ranges. While we were waiting for transportation back, the range officer could tell we were kind of concerned about going to Vietnam. And he said, the most important thing is, if you can get on the plane when you're coming back to the States, and you can honestly say to yourself that nobody was killed because you did something stupid, you can feel proud of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So again, if somebody's going to get hit, it was me. So anyway, I loaded up the bird with the ammunition and grenades and all, and we flew out there. And we were going to go in, and then the pilot went up, and I didn't realize why. And I looked over the side, and there was this big mass of flame down there, and I didn't realize what it was. The helicopter took me back to Camp Evans, and then I caught another flight out to Ripcord, at which time I found out that was a medevac that was shot down, and it had priority, so we had gone up to let the medevac in, and it was hit by an RPG.
Mm-hmm.
So later that afternoon, we went out to deliver the ammunition as well as to pick up the rucksacks and things of the soldiers. And my two sergeants who had been with the 1st Division jumped on with their rifles, and I kicked them off 3 times. And they said, we don't want anything to happen to you. So we went.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened, but
All right, so you had good men with you. All right. Now, when you're up at Ripcord, did you have a sense that things were gradually getting more intense before the 1st of July? Was there a change in mood or
Okay.
intelligence or?
the situation was we were stand down at the beginning of June.
Mhm.
At which time first of the 106, first of the 506 took over Ripcord while we were at stand down.
Mhm.
We all knew we were going to get blasted when we went back to Ripcord. I mean, we all knew the signs. And the day before we were supposed to go back to Ripcord, Colonel Lucas wanted a photograph of the officers on the helipad there by our tower.
Mhm.
And I was working, getting the supply nets and all that stuff ready, and Colonel Lucas ordered me over, and I was not enthused about being in that photograph because all it reminded me of was the Last Supper.
Mhm.
You know, here we all are before we're killed.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was in the photograph. Some of the officers avoided it. And then that night, there was to be a huge banquet in the mess hall. And I did not go to it because, again, it smacked of the last dinner. So we went out to Ripcord, knowing we were going to get smacked. And of course, going to the briefing every night, heard about the wiretaps, and knowing that we were going to be hit on or about the 1st of July. And so everything was being prepared, food gas being put in barrels and things of that nature. And Colonel Lucas was going to have a mad minute the night of June 30th at 10 o'clock. Now, one of the things about the 5 of us in supply, we worked our butts off all day long, and by the time the day was over, we were tired.
Mhm.
That may seem strange, but it was true. I mean, a case of ammunition, let's say for 45 caliber, weighed 75 pounds. We could lift them up with our fingertips.
Mhm.
Case of C ration, 25 pounds. We could hold them from down here up to our nose and walk with them. And so anyway, we were supposed to have Mad Minute at 10. So 10 came and went. Nothing happened. So I said, let's rack. So we all went to the rack. Mad minute starts around 11 o'clock. It woke us up, but what the hell? During the mad minute, Colonel Lucas puts his head in, get out there and get online. So,
Now, an outside audience won't know what a mad minute is, so you want to explain what that is?
okay, a mad minute is where every rifle machine gun on the perimeter fires off on its zone of fire. And what it's doing is ensuring that the machine guns know their zone of fires, the riflemen know their zone of fires, the M79 grenade launchers know their zone of fires, and all they're doing is, if the NVA gives us a night attack, we're going to blast them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what's going to happen to you.
All right, so we've done that, and then that's June 30th.
Pardon?
Now that's okay, that's on June 30th.
Right. So every morning at a certain time, I would go out and check all of the liquid containers, which were the rubber blivets. The ones with white discs on them held water. Red discs held gasoline, blue discs held diesel, and yellow discs held JP4. And I would check how much water, MoGas diesel there were, and then I'd walk across the helipad and go check the JP4. There was a device where I could check to see if there's any water in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do every day at a certain time, like clockwork. So, wake up in the morning, I said, to hell with it. Lucas woke us up last night, I'm going to put in an extra half hour. At which point in time, the mortar rounds went right across the helipad where I would have been walking if I hadn't had a case of the ass and stayed in bed.
All right, so the mortar rounds start coming in, and do you have a sense that it was just going to escalate, or did you really not know yet?
Did not really know. But what was interesting was, when I was working the oil field before getting drafted, there were a number of World War II vets, and one of the things they told me was, learn to react before impact.
Mm-hmm.
So if you hear incoming, dive to wherever you can. But again, I was not in that situation on the morning of the 1st of July. But it was just one of those situations where if we had been quicker getting to where that unit was instead of the medevac, it could have been me. Mm-hmm. If I hadn't got a case of the ass at Lucas, it could have been me. So what I'm saying is, chance plays an awful important role in what happens in war, or in life, in any day.
Certainly. Okay. Then you have July 1st, the bombardment starts, but then Charlie Company is out on 902.
Right.
And they stay over. They're told to stay in the same place 2
Right.
nights in a row, and that's
Right.
an order from Colonel Lucas. And there's Captain Hewitt out there makes some effort to change that, and of course they get hit by a sapper company that night, and the company was under strength because one of their platoons was on Ripcord at that point,
Right.
and they get overrun and smashed up pretty badly. Were you at all aware of the decision-making process ahead of that?
None
That was
whatsoever.
but you would have been certainly aware when the firefight happened.
None, and that's the odd thing about it. I could see 902 from the back door of our bunker,
Mm-hmm.
but we were totally unaware of it, either because we could not hear it due to the distance, or we were so deep in sleep
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't hear it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the attack, it was largely satchel charged and things. It wasn't like there was a lot of heavy ordnance being
Right.
used.
Now, what happened the next morning, or when daylight came, in the S3 was Captain Lieb, who had been with Charlie Company. So he got together the relief to go over there and help them out. They scrounged up all of the material to include a load of satchel charges that were backloaded to Ripcord. And Lucas didn't want any of that stuff on Ripcord. Now, all of the dirty ammunition, all the satchel charges would be put into wooden ammunition boxes and nailed shut to do what the division said must never be done, and that is dump it in the South China Sea. So this would have been the second load. I had taken a load out in April, and this would have been my second load in July, when I took a load out to drop in the South China Sea. These boxes, I think there were maybe about 8 boxes full of bad ammunition and satchel charges.
And these were things tossed by the North Vietnamese
Right.
that did not blow up.
That did not blow up, or that had been lost on the battlefield.
Okay.
In other words, it may have fallen out of their satchel.
Yeah, or they got hit and
Right,
dropped it.
and couldn't use it.
Yeah.
And of course, they didn't want it on the fire base because it's more detritus, so to speak, that could cause damage if it was hit.
Mm-hmm.
At the last moment, one of the enlisted men threw on a law light anti-tank weapon, 66 millimeter casing that was defective, hadn't gone off, and threw it in to be dropped in the South China Sea. So as we flew out there, we got, I don't know how far offshore we were, but we had passed the barrier islands and we're offshore over the South China Sea. The law was up there, and it was the first thing I decided to throw over. And as I threw it out, the slipstream blew it back, and it hit the mount for the M60 machine gun on the helicopter. The gunner looked at me, I looked at him, and then I started heaving the boxes out. It was just one of those things that it could have been an accident that could have blown us all to hell.
Yeah.
But again, it's just, he just wanted to get rid of the law, so he threw it on there and wasn't properly taken care of, and just one of those things that could have been bad.
And it's a lightweight plastic thing.
Right,
It's not a heavy,
right.
so big
Well,
to blow it at you.
It had the rocket inside of it,
Yeah.
but it was a lightweight tube.
Okay. So now now as July goes on, the bombardment picks up.
Right.
Does your job get harder then?
It's hard to say. Part of it was I was scheduled to leave for R&R on the 15th. And this is where I have divided thoughts. I quite forget which unit was sent over to the hill to the east of Ripcord, where they were getting shot up pretty badly. I think it was from 2nd Brigade,
There was a
501st.
it was Alpha Company 2501.
Okay.
Captain Straub, I think.
Right,
And then,
Captain Straub.
and-
Now what happened here is because I was getting close to going on R&R, and because it was so hot, I did not ride the helicopters over on those drop-offs. And then before going on R&R, I went to Colonel Lucas and I said, if you need me, I'll stay. And he said, no, you leave, go have fun. We'll still be here when you get back. I said, yes, sir. And what was interesting was the wind was so severe during those days that as the slick took off, it actually rotated under its blade. The wind just whipped it around. So I went to R&R in Hawaii. Last night there was in Honolulu ready to fly back to Nam, and we were looking at the nightly news, and there was the evacuation of Ripcord on the nightly news
Oh.
in Honolulu, so I knew going back that it was all over and done with.
And did you know at that point that Colonel Lucas had been
No.
killed? All right, so,
And this is what I mean by I was divided. If I knew that Ripcord was going to be hit the way it was, I would have stayed. And that may sound strange, but it was my home. I had built it up from the beginning. They were my soldiers. And I wanted to be there at the end to do whatever I could to help out.
So do you carry a kind of survivor guilt for that, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, should be perfectly understandable. Because yeah, I mean, you would have, yeah, if you knew they were in danger or whatever, you would be there with them.
Yep.
That's good.
And fortunately, none of my men were killed.
Mm-hmm.
One was wounded in the leg, a specialist car from Chicago. And he was going from our bunker down to the mess hall to get a cup of coffee, had coffee. I heard about this later because I wasn't there during that time. And a mortar round hit on the helipad, and his left ankle was severely wounded, and he was medevac back to the States. But one of the guys told me that when he was being carried on the stretcher to the aid station, he was just cursing. All I wanted was a damn cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Look at this.
All right. So when do you get back to the unit?
I got back to the unit on the 25th, and they were holding the awards ceremony on the helipad, and then they held the memorial service in the chapel after that.
And was that when you found out that Lucas had been
Yeah.
killed? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And so Ripcord part is over. How long do you stay with the battalion after that?
I stayed with the battalion until my time to come back to the States on the 23rd of October is when I returned to the States.
Okay. And were you basically just now resuming sort of the kind of duties you had before you went to Ripcord? Were you staying at Evans, or did you go out to the fire bases?
No, we were back to Evans to consolidate and unwind. Then we were sent out to Catherine, and I was out at Catherine doing the same job. And then from there we went to Rakkasan, and I was the same job there. And then I went back, I think 5 days before I deroast, to get everything cleared up back at the rear and teach my turtle how to do it. Now the turtle is the replacement.
Okay.
And I quite forget his name, but he was from a platoon leader from one of the companies, and he didn't seem at all interested in learning the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
And this bothered me because, again, to my mind, without those supplies, those soldiers suffered. But what was most important in getting the supplies out was that mailbag.
Mm-hmm.
Because that all that mattered was the food, the water, the ammunition, the mail. You know, those were all number one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't care enough to get that stuff out, you weren't worth having that job.
Okay. And then you also had a replacement battalion commander.
Yes.
What sort of officer was he?
Pitiful. He didn't know his rear end from a hole in the ground. As an example of this, when we were out at Rakkasan, he wanted supply to order grass seed, to put grass seed on the fire base to beautify it.
Okay.
And the S4, Captain Rowlandson at that time, pointed out fire bases are not supposed to have manicured lawns.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want any vegetation on fire bases because the enemy can hide in it. He was just so highly intelligent, he didn't know dip from Shinola. I'm trying to keep my words kindly.
Was he somebody that seemed to be maybe politically connected, or someone using this job as a stepping stone?
Oh yeah, it was a stepping stone. I mean, it was all part of the West Point
Mm-hmm.
cabal. You've got the ring, you get your pick units, you can rise up the ladder.
Mm-hmm. Well, people who wanted to be in Vietnam at that point were the ones building their careers.
Yep.
Probably.
I mean, the first battalion commander was West Point, Lucas was West Point,
Mm-hmm.
this one was West Point. And I'm just going to say this from my personal experience and observation, but I honestly feel that those officers who were enlisted men first had a better feel of things
Mm-hmm.
than those who were either ROTC or West Point. There were some West Point officers who were absolutely superb because they knew how to get along with their soldiers.
Mhm.
There were some ROTC officers, same way. But I also came across ROTC who thought they knew it all and they wouldn't listen to their soldiers.
Mhm.
Same way perhaps with West Pointers, you know. We've been taught, we know what to do, we'll tell you what to do and you'll do it.
Mhm.
And one of the things I learned, and I learned this from one of my college buddies who went in the Air Force before I went in the Army. And he had gone through officer training down in San Antonio. And at his first duty station, he learned to listen to enlisted men. And that's something he told me.
Mhm.
He said, listen to the EMs. They'll set you straight.
Mhm.
And that's what I did was, I'd listen to them. If they had told me a bunch of garbage, and I knew it, I wouldn't listen to them. But if they told me straight, we'd go with it and take it from there.
Mhm. Okay. Did you have much contact with the brigade commander, Colonel Harrison?
None.
Okay. Because he was former enlisted and,
Yeah.
and has a lot of those characteristics.
Right, but none at all.
Yeah. But he came in also relatively late.
Right.
Well, after several months after
Right.
Lucas. And I don't know, the brigade commanders kind of beyond your pay grade anyway?
Assuredly.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, one thing though I did want to mention, our Sergeant Major Williamson, he was one of the two soldiers in our battalion who had jumped during the Second World War. Williamson had jumped on Corregidor with the 503rd,
Mhm.
and he was sharp as nails. And he was eventually sent up as Division Sergeant Major. That's how sharp he was. Our S2 Intelligence Sergeant E8 had jumped at Normandy and at Nemagen.
Mhm.
And I mean, talk about history.
Yeah.
So that's about all from here, sir.
Okay. And that actually is the end of the tape. And that was
And,
what?
and the tape ran out 2 hours ago?
No, it's just running out now.